Should we go ahead and get started? Anna and Ivy, are you all ready? Okay, awesome. Thanks everybody for joining us today. My name is Rachel Brown. I'm with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. I'm covering for Kate Cohen as the Shared Risk and Protective Factors Peer-to-Peer Network lead. If y'all can type your name and your state into the chat so we know who all is on the call today, that'd be really great. And yeah, today we have Ivy Melton-Sales from the Davis County Health Department, who's the Division Director for Community Health Services, and Anna Fondario, the Program Manager for the Violence and Injury Prevention Program at the Utah Department of Health, who are going to present on the shared risk and protective factor approach that they take in their work. So thank you all. Just want to remind everybody to keep yourselves on mute. And then, yeah, Anna and Ivy, take it away.
I'm going first, not Anna, huh?
Whoever's ready to go first.
Something like a little bit of pressure. That's okay. All right. So everybody, like Anna mentioned, and I'm sure many of you experience, there's some level of COVID in your lives, and it creates some challenges when we're expected to do normal work and our brains aren't wired and ready and prepared to do the normal work. So I'm going to apologize in advance for my stumbling, and we'll see how well we get through this. So going to talk a little bit today about how we're doing shared risk and protective factors in Davis County, Utah. I've worked here with the Davis County Health Department for 25 years now, which still just boggles my mind. I was hired right out of college, and here I still am. Let's see. Did that advance right for everybody? Tell a little bit about Davis County, Utah. We're the oldest local health department in Utah. We are pretty much a suburban community that sits in between Salt Lake City, Utah and Ogden, Utah to the north of us. So you can see here on the map, we've got Ogden up here and Salt Lake down here at the bottom. It's a large area geographically when you look at the boundaries for the whole county, but most of it is lake and mountains. So the livable space where we crowd all of our people in, it's pretty condensed. Just to kind of give you an idea of how big this is, when you look at Interstate 15 that goes from the top here down to the bottom of the county, that's about a 30-mile stretch. And then our shortest stretch this way of road is about a mile long, and then up here in the north end, probably about 15 to 20 miles long. So small livable area. We have a single school district in our area, which makes partnerships really convenient with our schools. We do have an Air Force base right up here in the north end of the county that is our largest employer in the county. We do have out here in the Clearfield area what's called Freeport Center, a lot of manufacturing and distribution that takes place. We have an amusement park called Lagoon Amusement Park, the only amusement park between Denver and California. And our 2019 population estimate was just shy of 360,000 people. Just kind of give you an idea of what type of environment we are, and you can compare that to what you know where you live. I've kind of subtitled this our 20-year migration from Safe Kids and other siloed partnerships to community-wide collaboration rooted in data and best practices. We started over the past 20 years at a very slow crawl, and we have found ourselves in the past few years at a super sprint, and I'm sure that's similar for many people in their own jurisdictions where they work. There's three different category areas I wanted to talk about today. The first one's about leveraging your community partnerships and talking about how we did that here in Davis County. A lot of people are familiar with the Public Health Accreditation Board, and I'd like to say that FAB is your friend. Part of how we got into our super sprint is we made the decision to become an accredited health department. And as we went through the process of putting together the three core accreditation documents, your community health assessment, your community health improvement plan, and your strategic plan, that's where like all the lights turned on and everything clicked, and we found ourselves doing business very differently, a paradigm shift really in how we do public health here in Davis County. A couple of other things that went with this as we started down this road, probably around 2010 or so, we borrowed staff from across the department to work on these projects, and eventually evolved into having dedicated staff as members of our Board of Health, and our county government system saw the value in what we were working on. As you go through this, the other things I'm going to talk about here is how we're leveraging our existing partners, identifying gaps in those partners, and then the importance of recruiting champions to your cause. Okay, Fab's your friend. In 2013 and 2018, we did our 2 community health assessments. We never did this before. We utilized existing data sources primarily, so we didn't have to invest any money into doing extensive surveys or research. We did add some information into these processes from local focus groups and some key informant surveys, but we know that those were limited and introduced some bias into that overall process. We also brought together a number of partners, and those partners, what we did is we took a look at all of our, even within your health departments, you're pretty siloed, right? And so we brought together our different divisions of the health department and said, what partners do you work with in the community, no matter what aspect you're looking at from that? And then we said, okay, so who's missing from the table as we brainstorm that further? And then we took a look at that partner list and took a look at what would the data was saying in our community health assessment, what it was targeting, or what it was pointing to our biggest concerns and issues could potentially be. And then who were we missing to be at the table that would address those issues? And then we reached out and invited new partners to the table. This image here just shows one page of our documents, who were the people we had involved in our community health improvement process. And then the yellow ones I just highlighted who were brand new partners. And this is an ongoing process. It's not a one-time exercise. We're continuously looking at who else can we partner with to do some better change. One thing I didn't mention when I was talking about Fab's your friend is that you don't have to become accredited to go through those processes. I would highly recommend those exercises for any community group. And then we went through and we did our full community health improvement plan. I just wanted to share with what those priorities were with all the different partner agencies that we brought together. Our first improvement plan that started in 2014, our priorities were suicide prevention, increasing access to mental health services, obesity prevention, and improving air quality. And those have a lot of overlap, especially when it comes to shared risk and protective factors. And then when we redid this in 2019, we kept suicide prevention as a priority, a decision of all the different partners throughout our county. We added adverse childhood experiences and trauma, opioid misuse and abuse prevention. And then we decided that we had 2 items that really touched upon all 3 of those priorities, and those were improving access to behavioral health services, which was a continuation from the first community health improvement plan, and then overall prevention. That was a common theme that overlaps everything. When we talk about champions that you can commit, I wanted to highlight one specifically, and I spoke with Kate about this on the phone several weeks ago. We had a county commissioner that, you know, those county commissioners that come into your life that are just there for one term and they do a bang up job and they were really there for the right reasons, but then they're done with their political career and move on. That's what we had, and we miss him every day. He came from the Davis County Chamber of Commerce, which gave our entire county a better connection to that group within our county that we never had before, or not to the level that we have now. And then he also took a look at our county commission. They get assigned to different what's the word I want? Here's the COVID break coming in. Different topics or projects that we have throughout the county. And he looked at the things that he worked with and that he connected with on a regular basis and saw firsthand how siloed we were throughout the county, even though we had already been engaged in this community health improvement process for a while. And he pulled together our first ever Human Services Council. So it brought the health department, behavioral health, our homeless coalition, and different services in our domestic violence shelter together under an umbrella And I know other places across the country have this, but for our little suburban bedroom community, we'd never had this before. These types of things existed in Salt Lake and in Ogden, in those bigger areas, and not in our area. And it again, an additional paradigm shift. It took a look at what things do we have in common, what resources can we leverage together, and how can we do better and be synergistic in how we move forward. And then it resulted in a part-time position that was funded brand new from the county to help ensure that all the good work they do didn't get lost and they continue. So there's a little bit about bringing together different community partners very quickly. And then the next thing I want to talk about is identifying and aligning different issues we have, goals, objectives, and solutions. So we adopted as a whole community group the Take Action cycle from the Community Health Rankings and Roadmaps. And for those of you that aren't familiar, just read through it really quick. Assess needs and resources, focus on what's important, choose effective policies and programs, and then act on what's important and evaluate your actions. This is something that we repeat with on a regular basis in our different work groups. Every one of those priority areas that I mentioned, we developed a work group of community partners to come together and do this exact alignment thing with all of our different agencies that should have a seat at that table. So there's a little bit about, we also utilize the Bar High model out of the Bay Area in California. That's becoming a very popular and a useful tool when you're looking at upstream approaches, and then working social determinants of health into everything that we do as we move forward. So our data analysis, already shared that we did a couple of community health assessments that we took this data, each time we developed a new one of these, and we presented it to all of our community partners and highlighted where we were different than the state, where we were worse than the state primarily, and then where we were not meeting Healthy People 2020 targets, to kind of get a feel on where it is that we should be heading as a group. And then, like I said, we brought together work groups for each one of these topic areas. We did some voting and group discussion on what our priorities should be, and then developed our community health improvement plans from that. Another thing, when I was talking with Kate, she liked how we put a huge emphasis into not only evaluating our progress on how we share and communicate and work collaboratively together, but we have an annual celebration where we bring the whole group, all those different work groups that work on the specific prioritized topics. We bring them together, and then we highlight successes from different partner agencies, what they did over the past year, and they'll share their success stories, and that all goes into an annual report. The last thing I'm going to talk about briefly here is we feel it's important to not get hung up on the terminology. When you talk about shared risk and protective factors, there's people that have been working on this for a long time, and they've got specific ideas of what that means. So for us, it's important to, anytime we've got these new concepts, new models, best practices that come forth, to identify how that matches with what we're currently doing and what our partners are currently doing, and meeting them where they're at in that process. So it feels comfortable to them, so that it feels something that can easily be integrated into what they're already doing, that they can turn around and communicate that successfully to their own organizations and their partners and so forth. So do you want to talk a little bit about risk and protective factors? I don't know how common this is across the whole country, but in Utah we have what's called the Student Health and Risk Prevention Survey. It focuses traditionally for many, many years a lot on substance abuse and health behaviors. In this survey, what we did recently, and it's done on a state level every other year, and it's close. We get a high participation rate, and then they break it down also into different jurisdictions. For us, one school district, one county. It's a county level results. The risk factors that we identified from there as our entire collaborative organization here in the county. A low commitment to school is a risk factor here for a bunch of different risk behaviors. Depressive symptoms, suicide is a huge issue here in the Mountain West and in Utah, and in family conflict. And then our group sat down together and they said, okay, so based on everything that our different disciplines and organizations know, what do we see as protective factors that can help combat this and that we can take a look at and we can enhance and we can communicate throughout our community to make improvements. And those were building resilience, particularly in youth, connecting our communities, increasing knowledge in parenting, parenting and child development. That ties in really closely with the work we want to do with adverse child experiences. And then increasing access to different care, whether that's healthcare or behavioral health care, and then economic stability. And that's a huge focus of our human services coordinating council. And I'm gonna look at my notes and see if I missed anything. On the risk factors, one thing that our collaborative group here mentioned, they said, while all these factors are of most concern on youth, they are relevant for our entire community. So what's impacting our youth impacts the full family unit, impacts full neighborhoods, impacts full communities. And then the protective factors, while these are a little bit different than what came out of that traditional, what a lot of people in our community are familiar with, that SHARP survey data, it aligns really well with what was already presented in there on what protective factors have been identified for students primarily in our community. Okay. Some other things with risk and protective factors, there's some other ways to look at those. And again, we don't want to get hung up on the terminology, but where can we align, where can we overlap that as much as possible? And when you look at the social ecological model, our Utah suicide prevention plan, and how does that line up, and how do we take a look at how we can impact the individual, relationship, community, society levels, taking into account these concepts of what is shared across everything, risk-wise and protective-wise. And I mentioned earlier, bar high, social determinants of health, moving upstream. This is a picture from the last time that we met with everybody in 2019. Teaching them how do we think about this a little bit differently in our approaches and where are our opportunities to make improvements. This is another thing that we've talked, that we share regularly with all of our different partners. I think it's a good visual. I apologize, it's a little fuzzy. I copied it out, I took a screenshot out of one of our documents quickly. If we've got all of our different organizations with their own goals and their own objectives moving in their own direction, it's hard for us to make a big impact. And so we communicate this with them. This is why we want to bring together and why everybody should still have their own focuses and their own goals, but where we can and where we can align and where we can put things on a similar direction, a similar path, we're going to have greater outcomes and better change, better health for everybody. Some of the things that we've done about this, again, I mentioned meeting people where they're currently at. Where is your program, and what are you already working on when it comes to these specific priority areas, and what resources do you have to provide to the overall solution? And this has also enabled us to take a look at some existing funding, not only for the health department, but other agencies within the county, and how can we turn around how we're using that funding to meet the goals. So leveraging our funding and also apply for new funding. Part of what we put together for our annual celebration and our annual report is we capture from all the different partner agencies what additional grants that they have been able to apply for, and they utilize that community health assessment and the things that we have written in our community health improvement plan as a basis and justification for those different grant applications that they participate in. And then we've made community-wide logic models. I wanted to talk a little bit about the 3 current programs we have and a couple of the successes that we have seen, not programs, priorities we have that are community-wide. This is our prevention model for our suicide plan. We have an existing coalition in the county called Davis Helps that traditionally for years has worked on substance abuse prevention. But they've adopted suicide as a priority, so we have utilized that coalition to move forward instead of creating something new. Some things that the successes that have come out of this group, we have a greater coordination of resources. We have developed, we hold youth mental health screening events at area schools where we bring together different providers, and it's done for free and it's advertised through our school system. We've done it at the secondary level and the elementary level. The elementary level was a brand new thing we added on this last couple of years. We developed early on, we identified that people just don't know where to go for mental health resources when we said we wanted to increase access for that. We developed a community-wide resource directory that we can't even count on anymore how many times we have referred that and shared that out with different people. I don't know if can you guys see me while I'm presenting? I'll hold this up or I can share it later. This last year we developed something similar that was specific to youth. What resources are available for parents that just can't figure out what to do. We developed resources for when law enforcement or EMS get called to a home and the parents are just at a loss, or the other family members are at a loss what to do. Here's some resources that they can leave in that teachable moment with that family or those other people. We've also been able to leverage funding to pull together and coordinate different programs in our school. We have statewide, we have an app called Safe Talk, where youth or adults, anytime that they use it, they have access to a counselor anytime, day of night. And then it collects if there's issues that need to be shared back to the school level, to the administration. That's been very helpful. We also have a thing called Help Squads that's been coordinated really well through part of this overall organization and partnership. And I'm taking all your time. I'm gonna have to go a little faster. Here's the one for ACEs and trauma. It's brand new. We're just diving into this. A couple of successes we've had from this already. We have two different times now we've held a resiliency symposium, a conference, because one of our goals is to teach people about we want them to be trauma informed, and we want them to know about resiliency, and we want them to know about resources. And so the health department, we're not too terribly involved in this. We've got that part-time person that helps coordinate everything. This is definitely something that pulls together from all the different organizations in our county. And then the Human Services Council, this is a big portion of what they're focused on. Opioids, just a couple of successes we've had with that. We've brought together a very diverse group of partners. The opioid crisis touches so many different angles. I'm sure a lot of you are aware. I don't want to tell you stuff you already know. Some of the successes from this is we have a shared agency countywide opioid crisis response plan. So if we see an uptick in overdoses, what can we do to bring everybody together to address that and to try to slow that down as quickly as possible before it gets more detrimental. We've got shared data from different organizations. We have a brand new, what we call a receiving center in our county. It's a partnership between behavioral health and our county sheriff's office. So instead of somebody going straight to jail because of an opioid possession, they can go to this receiving center and get treatment services instead. It's working fantastically. Right along with that, during kind of an interesting tie-in with COVID, with some of the CARES Act funding, we have identified to help with isolation and quarantine, investing in a former group home that the county has purchased that we're using for that purpose, and then afterwards rotating it in to benefit some of this long-term stuff with receiving center and opioid. We've also developed an opioid education and misuse prevention toolkit that's fairly comprehensive. Our Davis Behavioral Health, the clients they work with our group, they've started doing some case fatality review lesson learned with our coalition. And I think that's all I had there in my notes for that. I didn't end that very well, kind of rambled. The last thing, I stole a slide from Anna's presentation, and I thought she was going to go first, so this was going to be a tying it together. So now this is a preview to Anna's presentation. These are shared risk and protective factors that have been identified with the violence and injury prevention program for the state. And the first two columns are what the state has identified. And then the third one is where I kind of tied in where this already matches and where this aligns with what we've already been doing in our county. So our community health improvement plans have been touching upon that healthcare access for quite a while now. So how can we take, as the state moves forward with what they're doing with shared risk and protective factors, and how can we align so that we're creating greater outcomes. Economic stability is part of that Human Services Council that was pulled together by a former county commissioner that is still working really well. Things with social norms, and stigma reduction and those types of things are already tied in several places within our current community health improvement plans. The built environment, we're impacting that by aligning our goals and finding different funding opportunities and aligning funding that we have. And then our overall connectedness, it happens at the community level, but also our entire collaborative here for the county is called Davis for Health. So how do we introduce those new ideas? Well, we show them how we're already doing it and how it aligns and meeting everybody where they're at. And then, oh, there's the ones that I showed earlier and how they overlap. And we started 5 minutes late, so I really only went 20 minutes. And I will stop there. We can show this slide later, or we can email this address out. If any of those documents that I showed screenshots of very quickly are available on our website, and that's the web URL for that. And Rachel, we want to hold questions till the end, or do we want to in the middle?
It's up to you all.
Let's do it at the end so we don't accidentally short Anna on some time.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, Ivy, you're just fabulous as always. Now I have to go after you. I was intending to go before you. So it's always so amazing. I mean, Davis County Health Department does such amazing work, and I know this. And then every time I hear Ivy speak, I'm just always in awe. I've asked her to be my mentor so, like several times. She's amazing. There's so much to learn from that local health department. So thanks, Ivy. That was great. So I'm Anna Fondario. I work in the Violence and Injury Prevention Program at the State Health Department in Utah. I'm the program manager. I feel like I'm still fairly new to this position, though it has been 2.5 years now. Previously, I was the epidemiology manager and then worked as an injury epidemiologist within that program. And it's interesting because just within those roles, I felt like within our own program, I was very siloed with the work that we were doing and very focused on data and looking at kind of the top indicators for violence and injury, and very focused that way. And until I became the program manager, it just gave me an opportunity to really look and think broader. And it's really opened my world up to this kind of approach. And so I feel like I'm still learning, still new, but I'm really excited for these opportunities, especially for our program at the health department. So thanks for the opportunity for allowing us to share our shared risk and protective factor approach in Utah. This journey has taken us several years, and with thoughtful coordination with our partners, we hope we can collectively understand its value and apply this framework within each of our agency's strategic efforts. This is just kind of a slide showing the mission and vision of the Department of Health, and I feel like that the Department of Health's vision statement aligns with this framework and approach. And you can see that here. It's for Utah to be a place where all people can enjoy the best health possible, where all can live and thrive in healthy and safe communities. These are the strategic priorities of the department, and you see that a shared risk and protective factor approach also aligns under the strategic priority, the first one, that the people of Utah will be among the healthiest in the country. And then I just wanted to also share that the department's vision and strategic priorities.
I think we're hiding your clock.
No, I don't know.
Sorry, also align well with our own program vision and strategic priorities. And as we've gone through this process, we've adjusted and adapted our vision and mission statement over the past couple of months to really reflect the work that we're trying to do. So we do envision a Utah where communities thrive and all people feel connected, safe, and supported. And we aim to do that through providing trusted data, comprehensive resources, valued community engagement, and to develop strategic partnerships that prioritize comprehensive strategies and policy to prevent violence and injury in Utah communities. We also came up with a culture statement because we also wanted to make sure that the way we were working in our program was supportive of our vision and mission. And as Ivy mentioned, and everyone knows, just trying to adjust to our work environment through COVID, I just kind of showed that, you know, we still try to find ways to connect as a program. That last picture was during the holidays, so I didn't want anyone to think, oh my gosh, they're all together without masks. But we've had the opportunity to get together and do fun things to be able to keep connecting through this time, which I think is really important as a program. So I want to quickly take you back to our previous strategic plan. Back in 2009, we conducted a needs assessment, surveys, focus groups. We did strategic planning sessions with key partners to develop this plan that focused primarily on violence and injury across the lifespan. You know, we looked at data and analyzed it to determine the magnitude of violence and injury in Utah. We surveyed partners to determine capacity and resources in the state. And then we established priorities by considering specific factors for each topic. And this included things like the size of the problem, seriousness of the problem, effectiveness of intervention. And we looked at economic feasibility, acceptability, resource availability. And after all of these factors were considered and we calculated scores, we determined back then that we should focus on prevention over the lifespan of Utah residents. In order to most effectively use our resources, collaborate with partners, and ultimately prevent violence and injury. So what you see on this slide are the topic areas we identified as priorities for each group. And so this was our strategic plan leading up to 2020. As we began to gear up to update our strategic plan a couple of years ago, so when I became program manager, so this was early in 2018, we began to shift our approach to the work we were doing and realized that the previous approach did not go upstream enough when we look at some of our strategies. And so along with the work we were doing and with some of our federal grants and the work Colorado was doing and hearing more and more about shared risk and protective factors, I actually remember sitting in one of Davis County's community health improvement meetings, plan meetings a couple years ago, and I think it was one of the celebration ones. And I was brand new to my position, and Ivy showed this, but they presented the logic models for adverse childhood experiences and for prevention. And something just finally clicked, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is the direction we're trying to go in, and we need to go in, and they've been doing this. And so it was such a inspirational moment for me to see that this was happening at the local level. And why were we not doing this at the state level and moving in this direction? And so we started thinking about it and moving in that direction. And so, so here we are doing that. And so Ivy mentioned the Bar High framework, and I really like that framework. The framework that they developed kind of shows the connection between social inequalities in health and focusing on measures which we typically have not included in our scope of work as measures. And that has been challenging for us, and we've been working through that to understand and identify what measures should we be looking at. And that framework, this framework that you can see on the screen, shows kind of how we should be shifting how we approach our work and ultimately our strategic plan, from focusing on injuries across the lifespan to one with a shared risk and protective factor lens. And with this approach, we could impact multiple outcomes which made sense with limited resources. As you all know, prevention science tells us that there are social determinants that play a significant role in our health and safety. And these determinants, which we talk about as shared risk or risk and protective factors, are what we want to increase or decrease to address community health and safety issues. And we know that many of these factors work together to determine health. But we also know that an individual's health is a product of many factors that include social, physical, and the economic burdens they face, quality and safety of communities, access to education, healthcare, affordable housing, availability of food, healthy food, and even the presence of discrimination in all of these factors. And so these factors that determine health outcomes are often not distributed equally in communities. And we know that through the work that we've been doing, and that health disparities exist among specific population groups. And addressing those social determinants of health is a primary prevention approach to achieving that health equity. So everyone's probably familiar with these images. In the first image, it's assumed that everyone will benefit from the same supports, and everyone's being treated equally in that first image. In the second image, individuals are given different supports to make it possible for them to have equal access. So they're being treated equitably. Through our process of looking at social determinants of health and health equity, we want to even take a further step back. And so you could see the same concept here in this figure, where in the first image, you see that everyone is benefiting from the same support. In the second image, individuals are given different supports to make it possible for them to have equal access. And this, it's for the game, to be able to view the game that's being played. But in the third image, which I think is really important for us to start thinking about and considering, is that without any supports or accommodations, that everyone has access to seeing the game, because the inequity was addressed. And so what we like to look at, that fence, that chain linked fence, changing that is kind of addressing the systemic barriers that we see when it comes to health equity. And so this is something that we are working on incorporating into the work that we're doing and our plans. So I want to take you back to this framework really quick. We've come to realize that a shared risk and protective factor approach improves multiple outcomes by aligning diverse multi-sector interventions and partners that positively and equitably impact the social determinants of health. And these interventions can be included across the socio-ecological model, including upstream and downstream interventions, and strategies that address underlying social and physical environments in a way that improves health and quality of life outcomes. So we know that determinants of health reach beyond boundaries of traditional health care and public health sectors, and includes other sectors like transportation, housing, economic development, education, and this gives us the opportunity to be able to work across these disciplines and share resources and leverage funding streams. So in 2018, when I went to Ivy's meeting and just experiencing these different conversations and things that Colorado was doing, we began to update our plan. And initially our work was informed by our grant, our RP supplemental grant, which required us to select sexual violence indicators through a shared risk and protective factor model. Excuse me, I just need to grab a tissue. Sorry about that. And then also our core SFIP grant, which outlined us working with our injury community implementation board to update our strategic plan using a shared risk and protective factor approach. And of course, we leveraged other resources that included Connecting the Dots. Many of you guys are familiar with that. Trust for America's Health, Pain in the Nation. It was a publication that looked at drug, alcohol, and suicide, the crises, and the need for a national resilience strategy. And then we heavily looked at Colorado's work and the strategic plan that they put together. And so there were a lot of, and the CDC provided a lot of technical assistance. During this time, we developed an exhaustive list of all risk and protective factors that are contributors to specific forms of injury and violence. And once we completed this, our list included 182 risk factors, 108 protective factors, and we identified 14 violence and injury topics that those would impact. And so through collective efforts with our partners, we identified broad categories that we prioritized. And then we also did a ranking exercise that focused on several different criteria. And so one was looking at the relevance or importance of that factor. And so we asked our partners if this category aligned with their coalition goals, if they had community partners who worked in that area. We looked at feasibility and acceptability of the factor. And so we asked partners if their coalition had programs or strategies that address that area, and if they would focus on this type of work over the next 5 years, and if there was a political will to improve that area. We looked at the impact of the factor. So will improving this area have the ultimate outcome of reducing injury and violence in Utah? And if it can be approached through a larger scale. So really looking at the outer levels of the socioeconomic model. And then finally, one of the questions that we looked at and asked was funding. So were funds available to develop programs and strategies in this area? Was there a potential opportunity to braid funding and look for other opportunities to help address these factors? And so we came up with this kind of model that kind of shows the process that we went through in developing our shared risk and protective factor framework. So as a result, we identified the following super factors, and Ivy shared this with you on her slide. So for our plan, and it's improving access and utilization to physical and behavioral health care, improving the socioeconomic conditions for Utahns, encouraging social norms that promote safety and health, enhancing the physical environment to improve safe and healthy living, and then promoting individual, family, and community connectedness. And so those are the factors we've utilized and identified with our partners to develop our framework. So as we did this, we also worked with the Safe States Alliance and HMA consultants to conduct an organizational readiness assessment. And so we did this assessment both internally and externally with our partners to assess how well we understood this shared risk and protective factor approach and what steps we needed to take to move the work forward in our state. So in all, 22 staff internally were filled out the survey, 47 of our partners filled out the survey, and then we had key informant interviews, so 5 staff participated internally, and then 8 external partners did the key informant interviews. Some of the questions were related to attitudes and beliefs about shared risk and protective factors, language, overlapping work between agencies, current work that was happening, the super factors we identified, and just our overall readiness to implement this approach. And through that assessment, overall, many of our partners, both internally and externally, so when I say internally, we had our staff, but we also had internal Department of Health partners that we also had participate in this. But overwhelmingly, many agreed that there's a strong foundation for us to implement this approach across programs. And we felt like that was really important because we wanted to make sure that as we implemented this approach in Utah and developed this framework, that we had buy-in and everyone was kind of on the same page so that we could level set as we moved forward with this. One of the things that we did find is that there was a strong theoretical understanding of the approach, but there was a lot of hesitancy and uncertainty about how to implement it with many of our partners, with the exception of Davis County, because they're kind of strong leaders definitely with this. There were some comments about focusing on broader approaches so that even though our goal was to impact violence and injury outcomes, but they wanted to make sure that our framework was broad enough that we can also impact other outcomes like other chronic diseases as well. And so that way our framework be utilized more broadly than just within the violence and injury prevention program. And then some of the things that I thought was interesting with why partners wanted to be involved in this work, the top reasons were that they had also newer grant requirements, programmatic priorities, leadership priorities, and then just overall new research into primary prevention that they were using. And among the top resources needed to implement this approach, our partners identified that dedicated people were needed to drive this work, appropriate funding for primary prevention was needed, and internal commitment from senior leadership at the top was also needed. They've made it very clear that they want the actionable steps, like what's next in the shared risk and protective factor approach, because there is that solid understanding of the importance of it and the why, but what can actually be done now to make an impact, and how do we transition from how we've been doing things to this new approach, and just making the concept less abstract. So we did engage in a series of trainings, shared risk and protective factor 101, 201, 301. Unfortunately, we had to do all of this during COVID, so there were virtual trainings. But I would say that they were really successful. In the 101 and 201 trainings that we did with HMA consultants, we had almost 100 participants in that virtual training. They were 2 hours each. In the 301, it was a 6-hour session, which we actually just completed last week. We had about 50 participants that stayed on from beginning to end during that session. And these are the different these are the goals for the overall training sessions that we did with our partners. A lot of it was to make sure we're all on the same page, have a basic understanding of this approach and how it's being applied in our programming and how it can be measured. Making sure that we're all familiar with the super factors that were identified, and then just identifying next steps in everyone's capacity in building this approach. So let me just make sure I don't have anything. So just kind of going quickly through each of these sessions. I know we're kind of running out of time, but the 101 focused on introducing shared risk and protective factors, definitions, terms, exploring it across the socio-ecological model, discussing the connections using these resources. We did a poll to understand why this approach was important to our partners' work, and we discussed how to operationalize this approach in our state through small group work. And then we all made commitments to how we would advance this in our agencies. In the 201, we explored the theory of change and looked at Colorado's theory as well as Michigan's theory. And we engaged in exercises to move us beyond how we've been doing the work to a place where we can look at it through different eyes, ultimately understanding the work and pathways to achieving the desired outcomes through different lenses. And this really focused on health equity. So we wanted to understand like who should be included to achieve our purpose, what role these partners needed to play, what new partners we needed to engage with, and if there were current partners we had that may not fit with this model, and that it was okay to move on from that partnership with this approach if they weren't able to move on with us. And so I thought that was an interesting conversation. Again, I mentioned we focused on health equity during the 201 as well. We talked about we did racial equity impact assessments with each of the factors that we identified. So we have the 5 factors up there, and with the impact assessment, it was a systematic examination of how different racial and ethnic groups would likely be affected by a proposed action or decision. And so we went through these questions, and I won't read them here, but it's basically this kind of assessment is used to reduce, eliminate, and prevent racial discrimination and inequities as we implement these kinds of approaches. And so we had conversations around each of these factors and how it would impact these different groups. And then finally, for the 301, for each of the factors, we looked at evidence-based research-informed approaches, the measures for each of these factors, and then strategies and activities each individual organization, local and state government activities identified in the plan. And then we broke out in small groups and talked about what strategies were missing and what activities we needed to include. And so some of those questions, I think they're listed on here, that we needed. You could see the questions that we asked our partners. And so just going through this process with a lot of our partners really felt, it really felt inclusive, and that we took this approach together, and we're going to take all of that feedback and incorporate that into the strategic framework that we hope to release soon. And so finally, just moving forward, a couple of things since this process that we have adjusted and that we're working on is that we have changed all of our local health department contract activities to include shared risk and protective factor work. And then with the idea that they could use some of these different funding sources to braid their funding to have greater impact in these factors. And so local health departments and some of our other partners can identify the specific factors that they can work, that they're working on in their community, and be able to leverage the funding that we are providing them from other grants, federal grants, to make sure that they have the support they need to implement this approach. What we've also done is that we made sure that we align some of our strategies with our Bureau of Health Promotion Primary Prevention group. We've approached all of our new grants with a shared risk and protective factor lens, and we've reviewed our current grant activities to make sure that it's aligning with this approach. And so those are just some of the things. The other thing that I just want to mention is that we've provided technical assistance by doing primary prevention one-on-one trainings with each of the local health departments. And then just within our own program, our violence and injury prevention program at the state, we've engaged in a health equity training as a program. And so we have like monthly assignments and readings and videos that we've been watching and discussing to help inform just kind of our health equity knowledge and how that impacts violence and injury and how that can inform how we're approaching our efforts here. And then finally, just moving forward, we're committed to finalizing our strategic framework after going through these series of sessions with our partners, and hopefully be able to release that within the next month or so. So that is all I have. So hopefully I left some time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you both so much for taking the time to present to us today. Yeah, if folks have any questions, you can feel free to unmute yourself to ask or type into the chat.
I have a question for Anna, if I could. Hi, Anna, thanks for the presentation, and Ivy, really enjoyed your presentation as well. I'm wondering if the health equity questions that you incorporated into your strategic planning process is something that you would be willing to share, or whether that was sort of proprietary as part of HMA's work.
I'm not sure. I can ask them.
Okay.
So HMA, so Shannon is used to be.
I can ask you.
You know who Shannon is. Yeah, I'm not sure if it was. Yeah, I'm not sure, but we can definitely ask.
Okay, great, thanks.
They were fabulous to work with. Are fabulous to work with. They did a really good job in helping us through this.
We have a question in the chat for both of you about what you learned during the process that you wish you'd known ahead of time. Any advice for those of us just embarking on the process?
I wish I knew what Colorado had already done before we started. That's probably way too simple of an answer, but once I finally got my hands on some of their materials, and I don't know how they came my way, I don't remember. It was, again, a lot of that kind of light turning on moment, and here was a great resource that helped us better organize our thoughts and processes on what we were trying to do going forward. Another thing that I just thought of that's pretty interesting for those of you that are working specifically with ACEs, Brigham Young University has done some research on what they're referring to as counter ACEs, which is really just a different way to describe resiliency. And we stumbled upon that probably a little bit later than we would have liked to, but it's been very, very beneficial. Those were very topic specific things, not process things. Maybe Anna's got something along those lines. I don't know.
So just things that I learned during the process. Within our violence injury prevention program, I think, a couple of years ago, I think the work that we were doing, it was very siloed and very focused on the specific grant that we were working on. And though we were a program and had multiple teams working on these grants, I just feel like I feel like we could have learned so much more, I think we could have done a different process, and it would have made this process easier because we could have aligned some of those grant activities better as we were writing them. And then the other thing is just the work that the local health departments were doing. We kind of framed it differently and talked about it differently, but at the ground level, they were really already doing this work. And I think maybe if we were open enough to see that, it could have probably informed our process better. But I'm glad now I think we're at a place now where we're kind of on the same page, and that at the state, we're now recognizing, oh my gosh, they've been doing this forever, but how can we join this now and support them?
Just another thought, reading Lara's question a little bit more. While we've shared a lot, maybe we sounded like rah rah, look at all this great stuff we've done. The next steps are a little overwhelming and exhausting. Those trainings that Anna mentioned that our staff participated in, that's just been on the injury prevention side. What we're doing in health promotion and education statewide across many different topic areas. We're looking at doing these shared risk and protective factors and moving upstream in social determinants of health. And there are a lot of people, not just in our own individual health departments, but in our partner agencies statewide, that this is such a shift to the way of thinking. We were on a call earlier this week, Anna and I both, and Anna, I don't know if this stuck with you, it stuck with me. There was a person that's been working in their local health department for quite some time that commented they were frustrated about what this maybe means for the future of a program that they've been working in, and it was car seat specific. And they gave the comment of, well, car seats is about as upstream as you can get. And I'm sitting here thinking, oh man, we've got so much work to do, because yes, you're hitting at the beginning of that person's life, but upstream is so much more than that. So there is still a very, very steep learning curve that we are on, and a lot to do, but it's exciting at the same time, the potential that this has.
We have time maybe for one more question from Deborah. I would be interested to know more about how you are finding ways to lift up protective factors, resiliency, interested in the concept of counter ACEs. It can be harder to both know and also to talk about these rather than the risk factors.
We're just beginning. And so I wish I could share more about the resiliency symposium that I mentioned. I was not the staff person involved in pulling that together. And I also was unable to attend both of them. We picked and choose which staff went because we wanted to leave as many slots open for the community as possible. I can see if I can pull a little bit of more information and then get that to Rachel to share out with the group, if that would work. I'll touch base with our employee here. On that counter ACEs, Anna, what's her name? Allie? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, I don't know the name of the person. And I just started exploring the counter ACEs, which is an interesting concept.
Let me look real quick, see if I can find it.
And let's see.
Her name is Allie Crandall. She's out of Brigham Young University. We can see if we can find some contact information from her. She has been really gracious here in Utah to share her research with a lot of the health educators in our state, and I'm sure other audiences. I'll see if I can track down her contact information and get that to Rachel as well.
Yeah, and we've been looking at that concept because we ask the ACEs questions on the BRFSS, and so we wanted to see how could we ask the counter ACE questions on the BRFSS as well.
All right, we are at time. Thank you both so much again for presenting today, and thanks to everybody who joined us. I just dropped a link to the evaluation survey in the chat, and I'll also email that out as well, and email the recording of this presentation. So yeah, hope everybody has a great rest of your Wednesday. Thanks so much.
Thank you.